Today we talk about the lonely king and his silent guardian. In the quiet kingdom of Velmor, ruled by King Alaric, there existed a companion unlike any other. This was not a fellow noble, a soldier, or a scholar. It was a pet, a large, slow-moving, gray elephant named Malik. Unlike other royal animals that roamed gardens or participated in ceremonies, Malik spent most of his time in silence, wandering the castle halls and occasionally observing the king as though he were the wiser of the two. King Alaric himself was not extraordinary in the traditional sense. He did not engage in wars, nor did he expand his kingdom aggressively. His life was composed of small, repetitive actions. He inspected the castle every morning, met briefly with his advisors, and spent long hours reading in his private chamber. Malik, his elephant, was always nearby, moving quietly, never causing disruption, and yet somehow filling the emptiness of Velmor's slow days. The castle was vast but calm. Stone corridors echoed softly under the footsteps of guards, who walked slowly, carefully avoiding the tiles that were slightly uneven from centuries of wear. The gardens were maintained meticulously, but only with gentle effort. Trimmed bushes, steady rows of flowers, and small fountains that gurgled quietly. Malik often wandered into these gardens, pausing to smell a flower or sway with the rhythm of the fountains, almost as if he were supervising the tranquility. The people of Velmor were accustomed to this odd companionship. They rarely questioned the king's choice of pet. It was known that Malik was calm, intelligent in ways that were hard to describe, and occasionally capable of small, subtle gestures that suggested understanding. For instance, when the king walked slowly down the hall, Malik would follow, maintaining a distance that felt both respectful and protective. And when the king read alone in the chamber, Malik often sat quietly by the window, gazing outside without moving, keeping silent company. The palace staff had learned to adapt to Malik's slow, deliberate presence. They would clear food gently for him, ensuring he had his preferred leaves, fruits, and a small pond of water nearby. Malik, in turn, rarely caused any mess, and when he did, it was minor and easily cleaned. The staff treated him with a calm respect, acknowledging that in this kingdom, where nothing urgent ever occurred, the elephant was part of the natural rhythm. King Alaric and Malik shared a routine that few could observe and even fewer understood. Each morning after the castle's bells marked the hour, the king would rise and dress in simple robes, avoiding unnecessary ornamentation. Malik would amble to the king's chamber, waiting silently as he prepared for the day. They would then walk together through the castle, inspecting the library, the armory, and the gardens. No one else accompanied them. These inspections were quiet, with only the soft sound of Malik's steps and the occasional rustle of leaves or creak of floorboards breaking the silence. Evenings were particularly uneventful, yet oddly serene. The king would sit by the fireplace, reading letters, scrolls, or books he had collected over the years. Malik would lie near the hearth, occasionally shifting position, but otherwise remaining completely still. No other animals or people disturbed this quiet scene. Servants moved silently, tending to minor tasks such as lighting candles or delivering tea. The palace, in these moments, seemed to breathe slowly, almost as if it recognized that in Velmor, time itself had decided to proceed gently. Sometimes, Malik would perform a small, unexpected gesture. Perhaps he would raise his trunk slightly to touch the king's hand, or shift his weight to nudge a small object the king had dropped. These gestures were subtle, unnoticed by most visitors, but they were enough to create a silent, unspoken bond between the king and his companion. In a kingdom where dramatic events were rare, these tiny moments became significant, forming the backbone of Velmor's quiet history. The people of Velmore outside the castle rarely interacted with Malik directly. They knew of him through occasional sightings in the gardens or while walking past the castle walls. Some whispered tales of the elephant's intelligence, while others claimed he could sense danger long before anyone else. Yet, nothing in Velmore's slow rhythm demanded proof. Life continued, quietly and predictably, the king and his silent companion forming an anchor of calm in the unchanging kingdom. The library of the castle, one of the few places Malik allowed himself to linger, contained many dusty tomes about animals, kings, and the histories of other kingdoms. Malik never touched the books, but he would sit near the shelves while the king read, as if absorbing the knowledge silently through presence alone. Scholars who visited were intrigued, yet intimidated. They dared not disrupt the quiet interaction, often leaving the chamber with notes that mentioned the silent understanding between man and elephant, though they could never fully explain it. And so, in this quiet kingdom, with a king who avoided unnecessary fuss and a pet who required minimal attention, yet provided endless silent companionship, life proceeded slowly. Seasons changed, months passed, and years drifted by almost imperceptibly. To an outsider, Velmore might seem boring, its days repetitive, its events trivial. Yet to King Alaric and Malik, this steady rhythm was the very essence of their existence, a life measured not in wars or triumphs, but in calm, silent moments of understanding and routine. The most remarkable thing about Velmore was not its architecture, wealth, or even its king. It was the presence of Malik, the silent companion whose slow, deliberate existence mirrored the unhurried passage of time itself. And perhaps in that quiet companionship, Velmore's legacy would endure far longer than any fleeting tales of grandeur elsewhere. And perhaps, in that quiet companionship, Velmore's legacy would endure far longer than any fleeting tales of grandeur elsewhere. The days in Velmore passed gently, each blending into the next with hardly any distinction. King Alaric and Malik followed their slow, deliberate routines. Morning sunlight would spill through the tall castle windows, highlighting the dust motes that floated lazily in the air. The king would rise, dress in simple robes, and walk down the familiar corridors, Malik following with soft, measured steps. Each hall echoed faintly with their movements, yet the sound was calming, not alarming. The castle staff continued their duties with quiet efficiency. The cooks prepared the king's breakfast without haste, laying out bread, soft cheese, and occasionally fresh fruit. The young apprentices swept floors, organized shelves, and polished wooden doors, careful not to disturb Malik or the king. Every movement in the castle seemed synchronized to the slow rhythm set by the king and his companion. The outside world, with its sudden alarms and frantic bustle, felt far away. Sometimes the king would pause in the gardens to observe the small details. He admired the precise rows of flowers, the slight sway of reeds by the pond, and the gentle ripples in the fountains. Malik would stand nearby, his trunk occasionally brushing the leaves of a tree or tracing patterns in the soil. Visitors who wandered into the gardens often mistook the elephant for a mere decoration, not realizing the subtle intelligence and presence that Malik carried. Velmore's residents rarely saw the king outside the castle walls. The few who did often described him as a quiet figure, walking slowly alongside a massive gray elephant, speaking softly to no one in particular. There were no royal parades, no public speeches, no banners flying in the wind. Life in Velmore, even under the king's gaze, remained unhurried and unremarkable. And yet, those who glimpsed the pair felt a strange sense of peace, as though witnessing something timeless. The library remained the heart of the castle's quiet life.
King Alaric spent long hours there, reading through ancient scrolls, dusty tomes, and meticulous records of the kingdom. Malik would accompany him, sitting near the window or slowly wandering between the shelves. Sometimes the elephant would stop, touch a particular spine of a book with his trunk, and then move on. It was unclear whether he recognized the content, remembered the stories, or simply appreciated the presence of the written word. Scholars and scribes who visited often remarked on this peculiar behavior, writing detailed accounts that could never explain the silent understanding between the king and his companion. Occasionally, a minor event would ripple through the otherwise steady life of the castle. A servant might misplace a key, a candle would burn out faster than expected, or a small leak would appear in the roof after heavy rain. Each incident was addressed calmly, with no urgency. Malik, with his keen awareness, sometimes alerted the king to these small disturbances, a raised trunk here, a slow step there, but always in a measured, unobtrusive way. The kingdom's life revolved around such gentle corrections, maintaining a balance that seemed almost ritualistic in its predictability. Even meals followed a deliberate pattern. The king ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Malik enjoyed his leaves and fruit with equal care. No sudden visitors interrupted the calm. The hall remained quiet, filled only with the soft clinking of utensils and the occasional rustle of robes. Conversations were muted and practical. The northern garden needs water. The scrolls must be dusted. The candles are low. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, only the steady flow of a well-ordered, uneventful life. The seasons shifted with subtlety. Spring brought mild rains, nourishing the gardens and fields. Summer was warm, but not scorching, with breezes drifting through the castle corridors. Autumn's arrival was marked by the soft decay of leaves, and winter settled quietly, coating the gardens with a thin frost. Malik seemed to notice these shifts. He would pause in the gardens, sniffing the cool air or feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin, perfectly attuned to the slow changes around him. King Alaric's solitude was never lonely, for Malik's silent presence provided a companionship that words could never achieve. The elephant's large, steady eyes seemed to reflect a wisdom that surpassed the king's own. Their bond was understood by few and envied silently by those who glimpsed it. It was not love in a dramatic sense, nor friendship in the noisy way of humans. It was quiet understanding, mutual respect, and a shared rhythm that measured the kingdom's slow passage of time. Outside the castle, Velmore itself seemed to mirror the pace of its ruler and his companion. Villages remained small, roads were maintained rather than expanded, and merchants traveled at a leisurely pace. Rumors of neighboring kingdoms' wars or uprisings occasionally reached Velmore, but the news rarely affected daily life. People spoke in hushed tones, then returned to their gardens, workshops, and markets. Life was steady, measured, and calm. And yet, even in such a tranquil kingdom, small mysteries arose. Malik occasionally stopped in front of a window, staring at distant hills, as though he sensed something invisible to the human eye. The king sometimes noted this behavior in his journals, describing the elephant's reactions with careful observation, though never ascribing dramatic meaning to them. These little enigmas became part of the quiet tapestry of Velmore, unremarkable, yet strangely captivating. And so, days bled into months, months into years, and Velmore endured. The king and his silent guardian remained at the center of it all, a living testament to the beauty of patience, routine, and calm presence. To the outside world, Velmore might have seemed uneventful, perhaps even boring. But to the king and Malik, every quiet gesture, every slow movement, every day that passed without disruption was a triumph in its own way, a reminder that life need not be loud or dramatic to be meaningful. And thus, the kingdom of Velmore continued to exist, a sanctuary of calm in a restless world, held together by a king, his elephant, and the quiet understanding they shared.
And thus the kingdom of Velmore continued to exist, a sanctuary of calm in a restless world, held together by a king, his elephant, and the quiet understanding they shared. As years passed, the rhythm of life in Velmore remained unbroken. King Alaric and Malak had settled into a steady pattern that defined the castle and, in many ways, the kingdom itself. The king awoke at the same hour every morning. Malak, ever attentive, would be waiting, almost as if he had anticipated the exact moment. Together they would make their rounds, walking through stone corridors, the library, and the gardens, observing every small detail with calm deliberation. The gardens were particularly important to the king. Though he did not boast of victories or achievements, he took a quiet pride in the meticulous rows of flowers, the even paths of gravel, and the gentle fountains that seemed to murmur softly as water flowed over stone. Malak often paused near the fountains, dipping his trunk lightly to feel the water's temperature. At times, the elephant would nudge the king gently toward a plant that needed attention, or toward a fallen leaf that disrupted the symmetry of the rows. These small gestures were subtle, unnoticed by most, yet they became part of the kingdom's unspoken routine. Velmore's citizens rarely interacted directly with the king or Malak. They observed from a distance, noting the slow procession of man and elephant through the castle grounds, and then returned to their daily lives. Farmers tended their fields carefully, artisans shaped wood and clay into useful objects, and children followed patterns of work and play handed down from their parents. The pace of life outside the castle matched the serenity inside, slow, predictable, and almost hypnotic in its repetition. Within the castle, the library remained the center of quiet contemplation. King Alaric would often spend entire afternoons reading by the window, Malak lying nearby, eyes half closed yet attentive. Sometimes the king would murmur a thought about a historical event or a philosophical question, but Malak's only response was a gentle shuffle of his weight or a soft, deliberate swing of his trunk. This silent feedback, though minimal, felt significant to the king, reinforcing their unique companionship. Small events occasionally broke the monotony, though none were dramatic. A sudden storm might rattle the roof slightly, or a candle would burn out during evening reading. Malak, ever observant, seemed to notice these minor disturbances first. The king would follow the elephant's gaze or gestures, correcting small problems calmly, repositioning a candle, mending a leak, or tidying a scattered pile of scrolls. In this way, both king and pet maintained the smooth rhythm of the castle, ensuring that no disorder lingered longer than necessary. Visitors to Velmore were few, but when they did arrive, they were struck by the unusual dynamic of the castle. Scholars, merchants, and wandering nobles often remarked on Malak's presence, noting the quiet dignity of the elephant and the deliberate stillness of the king. Some attempted to engage the elephant, offering fruits or making noises to attract attention, but Malak usually ignored them, returning only to the silent companionship of his king. Visitors left with impressions of calm and stillness, recording in their journals that Velmore was a kingdom defined not by events, but by patience and quiet observation. Life in Velmore was also marked by subtle seasonal changes. Spring brought light showers that nourished the gardens, the warm summer days encouraged long walks in the castle grounds, autumn painted the leaves golden, and winter's frost glimmered quietly on windows and trees. Malak seemed particularly sensitive to these shifts. He would linger in sunny spots during colder months and move to shaded areas during warmer days, always adjusting to the environment in a manner that seemed almost purposeful. The king observed these habits, noting in his journals the elephant's responses to natural rhythms, and sometimes allowing them to guide decisions about castle maintenance or garden care. Even the social interactions within the castle were slow and deliberate. Staff and servants moved with careful steps, speaking in soft tones and avoiding sudden movements. Meetings with the king were brief, consisting mostly of routine updates or minor requests. The king listened quietly, sometimes nodding or giving a short acknowledgement, and then returned to his private chambers or garden walks. There was no haste, no urgency, every action aligned with the deliberate pace set by the steady presence of Malik. The bond between the king and the elephant grew over time. Malik had become accustomed to the subtle moods of Alaric, responding to the faintest change in posture or expression. Similarly, the king had come to rely on the elephant's silent guidance. Together, they navigated the small disturbances of castle life, the placement of furniture, the alignment of scrolls, the order of meals, with a shared understanding that required no words. It was a companionship built not on noise or drama, but on shared stillness and patience. In the surrounding town, people continued their lives with little interruption. They spoke quietly of the king and his companion, not out of gossip, but as a recognition of the unusual calm that characterized their ruler. Farmers grew crops slowly but consistently, artisans produced tools and utensils with careful precision, and children learned the arts of patience and observation from the rhythm of daily life. Even minor news, such as a stray animal wandering near the market, was noted and then forgotten, leaving the larger flow of life unchanged. Velmore's history, though unremarkable in the eyes of outsiders, was meticulously recorded in the castle archives. Every small detail, the time a candle was replaced, the repair of a window, the alignment of books in the library, was noted with care. These records, though mundane, reflected the very essence of the kingdom: patience, consistency, and quiet endurance. Through these small details, the story of King Alaric and Malik would eventually endure, even if no dramatic battles, rebellions, or heroic events ever occurred. And so the castle and its gardens remained, as they had for many years. Seasons shifted, minor disturbances arose and were resolved, and life proceeded at a slow, deliberate pace. King Alaric and Malik, in their silent companionship, exemplified a rare understanding of existence, that life need not be filled with grandeur or chaos to be meaningful. In their quiet world, patience, presence, and subtle observation were enough to define a kingdom's legacy. The days in Velmore continued, as did the silent walks of the king and his elephant. Each moment, though ordinary, was woven into a tapestry of calm that spanned decades. No event was too small, no gesture too insignificant, and no day passed without notice. Together, the king and his silent guardian held the kingdom in a quiet balance, a reminder that even the most uneventful lives could leave a lasting impression on history. And so, the days in Velmore continued, marked by the quiet companionship of King Alaric and Malik, his silent guardian. The rhythm of castle life remained unchanged. Each morning, the king awoke at the same hour, his simple robes neatly arranged, and Malik would be waiting at the threshold of the chamber. Together, they walked slowly through the stone corridors, listening to the faint creak of floorboards and the soft echo of their footsteps. The palace staff, moving carefully around them, had learned not to rush, for even the smallest disturbance could disrupt the subtle balance that defined the kingdom's slow pace. The castle gardens were a constant focus for both king and elephant. Alaric took pleasure in the steady growth of plants, the delicate alignment of flowers, and the gentle murmur of fountains. Malik wandered among the hedges and ponds with deliberate, careful movements, occasionally pausing to nudge the king toward a stray leaf or a misaligned stone. These small interventions, though simple, were enough to preserve the quiet perfection of the gardens and the castle grounds. Inside the library, time passed almost imperceptibly. King Alaric would spend hours reading ancient scrolls, dusty tomes, and carefully catalogued manuscripts, while Malik remained near the window or slowly moved between the shelves.
The elephant's presence created a sense of calm, a reminder that even in a world filled with knowledge and history, the most important understanding could be silent. Occasionally, Moloch would nudge a rolled-up scroll toward the king, almost as if suggesting a particular passage be read, though whether he understood the text was a question left unanswered. Castle life continued without major events, yet subtle changes occurred with the slow turning of days. Servants replaced candles, repaired small leaks in the roof, and dusted shelves with meticulous care. The king and Moloch oversaw these tasks silently, offering occasional gestures of approval. The elephant's keen observation often detected minor disturbances before the humans, a raised trunk or a careful step signaling something amiss. Together, they ensured the smooth flow of life in Belmore, maintaining a balance that few outside the castle could comprehend. The townspeople rarely interacted with the king directly, but they were aware of his presence and the quiet majesty of his companion. Farmers continued tending their fields with patient diligence, children played in orderly patterns along narrow streets, and artisans worked slowly, shaping their crafts with care. News from neighboring lands occasionally arrived, describing battles, uprisings, or sudden events, but Velmore remained untouched. Its inhabitants paid only polite attention, then returned to the calm rhythm of their own lives. The bond between king and elephant deepened over time. Moloch had become attuned not only to the king's movements, but also to the subtleties of his emotions. A slight hesitation in a step, a pause in reading, or a thoughtful gaze was enough to prompt a response, a gentle nudge, a shift of weight, or a slow turn of the trunk. Alaric, in turn, came to rely on these gestures, seeing in Moloch's quiet presence a mirror of his own unspoken thoughts. Together, they maintained a kingdom where peace was measured not in victories or conquests, but in attention to the smallest details. Evenings in the castle were predictable and serene. The king would sit by the fireplace, reviewing manuscripts or simply watching the flames dance, while Moloch rested nearby, occasionally adjusting his position with careful deliberation. Servants moved silently, bringing tea or small meals, and the palace seemed to exhale a slow, steady rhythm. No one left hurriedly, no voices rose above a soft murmur. Life, in its simplest form, had become a meditation, a shared understanding between king, elephant, and castle. Occasionally, minor disturbances punctuated the calm. A stack of scrolls might topple, a window could rattle in the wind, or a stray leaf could drift into a hall. Each was addressed with quiet efficiency, often guided by Moloch's subtle cues. The king would move to adjust the scrolls, close the window, or brush away the leaf, and the rhythm of the castle continued undisturbed. These small events, insignificant to outsiders, became the markers of Velmore's unchanging passage of time. The seasons continued their slow, deliberate cycle. Spring brought gentle rains, encouraging the growth of gardens and fields. Summer warmed the stone corridors, inviting long walks in the castle grounds. Autumn painted the trees with muted gold and brown tones, while winter's frost settled softly on the roofs and windows. Moloch, ever observant, adjusted his movements according to the season, finding sunny spots in winter and shaded areas in summer, his behavior perfectly synchronized with the world around him. Even minor celebrations in Velmore followed the same slow rhythm. Twice a year, the king and his companions, mostly palace staff, would mark the changing of seasons with quiet gatherings in the gardens. No music blared, no crowds cheered. Instead, soft words were exchanged, small gestures made, and tea and simple pastries were shared. Moloch would participate in his own way, standing calmly, occasionally reaching for a piece of fruit or gently nudging a guest who approached too quickly. These small rituals, though understated, reinforced the unspoken harmony of the castle. And so, life in Velmore continued, years blending into decades, days following days, marked not by extraordinary events, but by careful attention to routine. The silent companionship of King Alaric and Moloch the elephant defined the kingdom's essence. To the outside world, Belmore may have appeared dull, uneventful, even boring, yet within the castle walls, every gesture, every careful step, and every moment of quiet observation was an affirmation of a deeper, enduring legacy. Even as centuries passed, the bond between king and guardian remained, a living testament to patience, presence, and the profound significance of quiet companionship. Through their shared calm, Velmore endured, untouched by chaos or spectacle, a kingdom whose history was measured not in battles or conquests, but in subtle gestures, careful attention, and the slow, deliberate flow of life itself. Even as centuries passed, the bond between king and guardian remained, a living testament to patience, presence, and the profound significance of quiet companionship. Through their shared calm, Velmore endured, untouched by chaos or spectacle, a kingdom whose history was measured not in battles or conquests, but in subtle gestures, careful attention, and the slow, deliberate flow of life itself. King Alaric awoke with the faint glow of dawn filtering through his chamber windows. Moloch, ever faithful, was already present at the threshold, waiting silently. Today, like all other days, their routine was unchanging, yet the king found comfort in its predictability. Together they walked the stone corridors, their slow footsteps echoing in harmony with the castle's quiet heartbeat. The palace staff had long adapted to this rhythm. Servants moved with deliberate care, ensuring that every candle was straight, every piece of furniture aligned, and every tray of food arranged meticulously. The castle, though vast, seemed smaller in these quiet moments, its grand halls softened by the steady presence of king and elephant. Visitors, though rare, often remarked on the calm that filled every corner of Velmore, attributing it to the unusual companionship of its ruler and his massive guardian. The gardens, too, were tended with extraordinary care. King Alaric often paused to admire the careful arrangement of flowers and the gentle curve of trimmed hedges. Moloch wandered slowly among the paths, his trunk occasionally brushing a leaf or adjusting the placement of a small stone. Together they moved through the gardens like twin observers, ensuring that every detail of the castle grounds was as it should be. Even the fountains, with their soft gurgle, seemed to acknowledge the slow, measured rhythm that governed the kingdom. Within the castle, the library remained a sanctuary of calm. Alaric would spend hours poring over manuscripts, reading scrolls that recorded the histories of distant lands, and occasionally penning his own observations about Velmore. Moloch, never far from the king, moved quietly among the shelves or rested near the large window watching the gardens outside. Scholars who have visited over the years spoke in hushed tones about the elephant's unusual attentiveness, noting how Moloch seemed to anticipate the king's needs without a word or gesture. Minor disturbances continued to punctuate life in the castle, though none threatened its tranquility. A fallen candlestick, a loose page in a manuscript, or a slightly misaligned shelf would prompt subtle action. Moloch, with his quiet awareness, often indicated the issue first, a careful nudge with his trunk, a slight shift of weight. The king would respond, restoring order with minimal effort. In this way, every day reinforced the kingdom's careful balance, and no disorder lingered long enough to disrupt the steady flow of life. Evenings followed a predictable, comforting pattern. The king would sit by the fireplace, reviewing notes or reading quietly, while Moloch rested nearby. Servants moved silently, attending to minor tasks like replenishing tea, lighting candles, or arranging cushions. The castle seemed to breathe alongside its inhabitants, a living, quiet organism where even small disturbances were handled with grace and precision.
Outside the castle, the town of Velmore mirrored this calm. Farmers tended fields with methodical care, children practiced slow and deliberate games, and artisans crafted objects with patience that seemed almost ceremonial. News of distant wars, political upheaval, or disasters reached the kingdom, but life continued unaffected. Velmore remained a haven of tranquility, its pace dictated not by the world outside, but by the unspoken bond between king and guardian. The bond itself had grown richer with the passage of time. Moloch had become attuned not just to the king's movements, but to the faintest changes in his mood. A hesitation in a step, a thoughtful pause, or a subtle sigh was enough to prompt a reaction from the elephant. A gentle nudge, a careful turn of the head, or a measured adjustment of posture. King Alaric, in turn, had come to rely on these silent signals, viewing them as extensions of his own awareness. Together, they maintained the delicate equilibrium of castle life, ensuring that Velmore remained untouched by haste or disruption. Seasons continued their slow, deliberate cycle. Spring brought gentle rains, nurturing the gardens and fields. Summer offered warmth without heat, inviting long, quiet walks. Autumn painted the trees in muted golds and browns, while winter's frost settled softly on windows and rooftops. Moloch, as always, adjusted his movements with the seasons, finding sunny spots in winter and shade in summer, ensuring comfort and rhythm in the world around him. Even the minor celebrations in Velmore were subdued yet purposeful. Twice a year, the king and his companions, mostly palace staff, would mark the change of seasons. There were no grand festivals, no music or crowds, only quiet gatherings in the gardens. Tea was poured carefully, small pastries served, and soft words exchanged. Moloch participated in his own quiet way, standing calmly, occasionally nudging a guest or sampling a piece of fruit. These understated rituals reinforced the unspoken harmony that defined the kingdom. The most remarkable aspect of Velmore, perhaps, was not the grandeur of the castle, nor the size of its lands, but the quiet endurance of its people and the silent companionship of its ruler and his massive guardian. Generations of kings had come and gone, but the pattern of calm, deliberate life remained unbroken. Here, victories were measured not by battles won, but by days that passed without disorder. Triumphs were marked not by spectacle, but by careful attention to the rhythm of existence. And so the kingdom continued its slow, deliberate passage through time. King Alaric and Moloch maintained their silent partnership, overseeing the castle, gardens, and library with steady vigilance. Life proceeded without drama, yet each small action, each careful step, each soft gesture formed part of a tapestry that defined Velmore's essence. Though the world beyond its walls was chaotic and unpredictable, within the castle, time moved gently and peace prevailed. The castle, gardens, and town endured. Seasons shifted, minor disturbances arose and were resolved, and life flowed with quiet consistency. The silent companionship of king and elephant formed the heart of Velmore, a kingdom untouched by haste or spectacle. Their shared calm became a legacy, a testament to the quiet power of patience, attentiveness, and steady presence. And in this way, Velmore continued, unchanging yet alive, its history measured not in dramatic events or extraordinary achievements, but in small gestures, careful observation, and the enduring bond between a lonely king and his silent guardian.
And in this way, Velmore continued, unchanging yet alive, its history measured not in dramatic events or extraordinary achievements, but in small gestures, careful observation, and the enduring bond between a lonely king and his silent guardian. The early morning light streamed through the tall windows of the castle, painting the stone walls in soft hues of gold and gray. King Alaric rose slowly, as was his habit, and found Malik already waiting in the chamber, calm and patient.
There was no urgency in his steps, no rush in his movements. Everything about the start of the day was deliberate, measured, and in harmony with the kingdom's quiet pace. Together, the king and his elephant began their morning rounds. The castle corridors stretched long and silent, the faint echo of footsteps marking the rhythm of their passage. Servants and staff moved around them with careful precision, mindful not to disturb the balance that defined Velmore. The floors, worn by centuries of quiet steps, seemed to recognize the pattern, creaking softly under the weight of routine rather than surprise. The gardens remained a focal point for the pair. King Alaric paused at familiar spots, inspecting the carefully aligned rows of flowers, the subtle patterns in the stone paths, and the gentle ripples of water in the fountains. Malik wandered alongside, trunk occasionally brushing a stray leaf or nudging a misaligned stone. The elephant's interventions were subtle, unnoticed by most, yet they preserved the harmony of the grounds, ensuring that nothing was out of place in the serene, methodical kingdom. Inside the castle, the library continued to serve as a sanctuary of quiet reflection. Alaric spent hours immersed in manuscripts and scrolls, his eyes tracing the faded letters of histories long forgotten. Malik often moved among the shelves or rested by the large windows, observing the gardens outside. Scholars and visiting scribes often remarked on the elephant's apparent awareness, noting in hushed tones how Malik seemed to anticipate the king's needs, offering subtle gestures that required no explanation. Minor disturbances occasionally punctuated life in the castle. A gust of wind might rattle a window, a candle could flicker or burn out, or a misplaced scroll might fall to the floor. Malik, attuned to these small shifts, would indicate the issue with a careful nudge or subtle movement. King Alaric, ever observant, would respond calmly, correcting the situation without haste. These small interactions, though trivial in appearance, reinforced the meticulous rhythm of Velmore's life and reminded everyone within its walls of the quiet power of patience. Even Nearsons followed their familiar pattern. The king would sit by the fireplace, reviewing notes or reading quietly, while Malik rested nearby. The palace staff moved silently, attending to minor tasks like arranging cushions or bringing tea. The castle seemed to exhale slowly, mirroring the measured pace of its ruler and his silent companion. The presence of Malik lent a sense of continuity to the evenings, reinforcing the calm that had defined Velmore for decades. Outside the castle walls, life in the town of Velmore proceeded with the same deliberate pace. Farmers tended crops methodically, artisans shaped their crafts with patient precision, and children learned the importance of observation and careful action from the rhythms of daily life. News from distant lands, wars, uprisings, or sudden disasters was noted politely and then set aside, leaving the inhabitants to continue their steady routines. Velmore existed almost in isolation, defined more by its internal harmony than by the events of the outside world. The relationship between king and elephant deepened further with the passing years. Malik seemed to understand not only the king's movements, but the subtlest changes in his mood or expression. A slight pause, a thoughtful gaze, or a quiet sigh would be enough to elicit a response, a gentle nudge, a shift of weight, or a quiet turn of the head. Alaric, in turn, relied on these silent communications, valuing the elephant's instincts as much as his own judgment. Together, they ensured that the kingdom's flow remained unbroken, a living demonstration of trust, patience, and attentiveness. Seasons continued their slow, inevitable cycle. Spring brought mild rains, feeding the gardens and the fields surrounding Velmore. Summer's warmth encouraged long walks through shaded paths. Autumn's leaves turned muted shades of gold and brown, and winter's frost glistened quietly on windows and rooftops. Malik,
ever sensitive to these seasonal changes, adapted his movements to the environment, finding warmth in winter sun and shade in the summer heat, always reflecting the kingdom's calm rhythm. Even the minor seasonal gatherings in Velmore were subdued yet deliberate. Twice a year, the king and his companions, mostly palace staff, would acknowledge the changing of seasons with small ceremonies in the gardens. Tea was poured, pastries shared, and quiet words exchanged. Malik participated naturally, standing patiently, occasionally nudging a tray or a guest, blending seamlessly into the understated rituals that marked the passage of time. Velmore's history, though non-eventful by the standards of other kingdoms, was preserved with meticulous care. Every small act, the lighting of a candle, the placement of a scroll, the realignment of a stone path was recorded. These records, though lacking in drama, captured the essence of a kingdom that thrived not on chaos or grandeur, but on quiet attentiveness, careful observation, and deliberate action. And so, the days continued, flowing into weeks, months, and years. The silent companionship of king and guardian remained the central heartbeat of the kingdom, shaping its character and ensuring its survival. To outsiders, Velmore might have appeared dull, uneventful, or even monotonous, yet within its walls, each gesture, each movement, and each small decision contributed to a living, breathing legacy. The castle, gardens, and town endured, a testament to the enduring power of patience and calm. King Alaric and Malik continued their slow, deliberate lives, watching over the kingdom, maintaining order, and ensuring the continuity of quiet, measured existence. In the stillness of Velmore, there was strength. In the silence of companionship, there was wisdom. And in the slow, unbroken rhythm of daily life, there was history. A history written not in battles or victories, but in small, enduring acts of care and presence.
The castle, gardens, and town endured, a testament to the enduring power of patience and calm. King Alaric and Malik continued their slow, deliberate lives, watching over the kingdom, maintaining order, and ensuring the continuity of quiet, measured existence. In the stillness of Velmore, there was strength. In the silence of companionship, there was wisdom. And in the slow, unbroken rhythm of daily life, there was history. A history written not in battles or victories, but in small, enduring acts of care and presence. The morning began, as always, with soft light spilling through the high windows. King Alaric rose quietly, and Malik was already waiting at the chamber's threshold. Their routine was well established, almost ritualistic in its predictability. The king dressed slowly, straightening his robes with deliberate care, while Malik shifted slightly, waiting for the first steps of their day. Together they moved through the halls of the castle, their footsteps echoing faintly, a rhythmic pattern that had become part of the stone itself. The castle staff, now accustomed to decades of this slow rhythm, moved with an almost meditative care. Servants dusted shelves with soft, precise motions. The cooks prepared breakfast with careful attention to arrangement. Apprentices polished brass handles and wooden doors, each stroke in harmony with the castle's deliberate pace. No one rushed, and no one acted without purpose. Every movement contributed to the seamless continuity of Velmore's quiet life. In the gardens, the king paused at familiar spots, observing the carefully aligned flowers, the soft sway of the trees, and the delicate ripples in the fountains. Malik ambled alongside, trunk occasionally brushing a leaf or nudging a misplaced stone. The elephant's movements were subtle, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but they ensured that every detail of the grounds remained in perfect harmony. Visitors who happened upon the garden often felt a sense of calm, as though they were witnessing not merely a king and his pet, but a living meditation of time itself. Inside the castle, the library remained a central place of quiet reflection. Alaric spent long hours reading, taking notes, and occasionally pausing to observe Malik, who sometimes moved among the shelves or rested near the large windows overlooking the Dardens. Scholars who had visited over the years often marveled at the elephant's apparent awareness, noting that Malik seemed to anticipate the king's needs without prompting. The silent interaction between man and animal had become almost legendary, though few could truly describe it. Minor disturbances still punctuated life in the castle, but none disrupted its rhythm. A gust of wind might rattle a window, a candle could sputter, or a scroll might fall from a shelf. Malik often detected these incidents first, indicating the problem with a small, deliberate gesture. The king would follow, correcting the minor disorder without haste. Each interaction, though small, reinforced the continuity of Velmore's life and the quiet authority of its ruler. Evenings were predictable yet comforting. King Alaric would sit by the fireplace, reviewing scrolls or simply gazing into the flames. Malik rested nearby, occasionally shifting position or gently raising his trunk to acknowledge the king. Servants moved silently, attending to minor tasks, replenishing tea, arranging cushions, and lighting candles. The castle seemed to breathe slowly, in sync with its occupants, a living organism defined by stillness and careful attention. Outside the castle, the town of Velmore mirrored the calm within. Farmers worked methodically, children played in quiet patterns, and artisans practiced their crafts with deliberate precision. News of wars, rebellions, or disasters from other kingdoms reached the town only occasionally and was met with polite acknowledgement before life continued as usual. Velmore's identity was shaped less by outside events and more by its internal harmony, dictated by the steady presence of king and elephant. The bond between Alaric and Malik deepened further. Malik had become keenly attuned to the king's subtle moods. Hesitations, thoughtful glances, or quiet sighs were enough to elicit responses. A gentle nudge, a careful step, or a quiet shift of posture communicated understanding without words. The king relied on these gestures as much as his own judgment, creating a partnership in which silence carried more meaning than speech ever could. Seasons continued their slow, inevitable cycle. Spring brought gentle rains that nourished the gardens. Summer's warmth invited long, quiet walks along shaded paths. Autumn's leaves turned muted shades of gold and brown, while winter frost settled softly on windows and rooftops. Malik adjusted his movements according to the seasons, seeking sun or shade, demonstrating an awareness that reflected and reinforced the kingdom's deliberate rhythm. Velmore's occasional seasonal gatherings were subtle yet deliberate. Twice a year, the king and palace staff would mark the passing of seasons in the gardens. Tea was poured with care, pastries served quietly, and soft words were exchanged. Malik participated naturally, standing calmly, occasionally nudging a tray or observing the guests with quiet dignity. These understated rituals reinforced the continuity and harmony that defined life in the kingdom. The most remarkable aspect of Velmore was not its architecture, wealth, or even its gardens, but the quiet endurance of its people and the steady, silent companionship between king and elephant. Generations had come and gone, yet the rhythm of calm, deliberate life persisted. Here, triumphs were measured not by wars or conquests, but by days that passed without disruption, by gestures attended to with care, and by the maintenance of slow, mindful presence. And so the days flowed gently into weeks, months, and years. King Alaric and Malik continued their slow, deliberate routines, walking the halls, tending the gardens, and overseeing the quiet order of Velmore. Each small act, every movement,
every careful step wove the tapestry of the kingdom's existence. Though uneventful to outsiders, these moments were the very foundation of Velmore's enduring legacy. The castle, gardens, and town remained unbroken by chaos or spectacle. King and guardian walked through life together, their silent bond shaping the rhythm of the kingdom. In the stillness of their shared existence, there was strength. In the quiet of their companionship, there was wisdom. And in the slow, unbroken rhythm of daily life, there was history. A history written not in battles or victories, but in small, enduring acts of care and presence. The castle, gardens, and town remained, unbroken by chaos or spectacle. King Alaric and Malik walked through life together, their silent bond shaping the rhythm of the kingdom. In the stillness of their shared existence, there was strength. In the quiet of their companionship, there was wisdom. And in the slow, unbroken flow of days, there was history. A history not marked by battles or triumphs, but by patience, attention, and the enduring presence of a king and his silent guardian. Morning light filled the tall windows of the castle, casting soft patterns across the stone floors. King Alaric rose slowly, and Malik was already waiting, his enormous gray form calm and poised. Their steps were measured, echoing faintly through the empty corridors. Every hallway, every chamber, every archway had become part of their shared rhythm, each echo a footfall, a gentle reminder of the kingdom's quiet pulse. The staff moved carefully around them, performing duties in soft, deliberate motions. Candles were straightened, floors swept, doors polished, and trays arranged with precision. Every action, no matter how minor, contributed to the smooth, deliberate flow of Velmore. Visitors who happened to see this routine often remarked on the harmony, though few understood that it was shaped by the silent partnership of king and elephant. The gardens were particularly alive in their stillness. King Alaric paused at familiar spots, examining flowers, shrubs, and the gentle ripple of fountains. Malik moved slowly beside him, trunk occasionally brushing a leaf or nudging a stray stone back into place. These subtle gestures, almost imperceptible to anyone else, maintained the delicate symmetry of the castle grounds. To the casual observer, it appeared as though nature itself responded to their presence, bending slightly to the rhythm of their quiet companionship. Inside the castle, the library remained the center of contemplation. The king spent long hours reading ancient scrolls, dusty tomes, and manuscripts recording the history of distant lands. Malik moved carefully among the shelves, sometimes resting by the window, occasionally nudging a scroll toward the king. Scholars who had visited over the years described the elephant as intelligent beyond measure, though none could fully explain how Malik seemed to anticipate Alaric's needs without any words or commands. Minor disturbances continued to punctuate life in the castle, though none were significant. A gust of wind might rattle a window, a candle could sputter, or a small scroll might fall. Malik often noticed these events first, alerting the king with a gentle nudge or shift of weight. Alaric would respond calmly, adjusting the environment as needed. These small interactions, repeated countless times over decades, reinforced the rhythm of Velmore, ensuring that every day passed without disruption. Evenings were predictable, yet comforting. King Alaric sat by the fireplace, reviewing notes, reading quietly, or simply watching the flames dance. Malik rested nearby, occasionally raising his trunk or shifting slightly to acknowledge the king. Servants moved silently, attending to minor tasks, ensuring that the castle's rhythm remained unbroken. In this quiet environment, every gesture carried meaning, every subtle movement contributed to the kingdom's sense of order and harmony. Outside the castle, life in the town of Velmore mirrored the calm inside. Farmers worked slowly and methodically, children played quietly in the streets, and artisans shaped their crafts with deliberate precision. News from distant kingdoms, wars, uprisings, or disasters was noted politely, then set aside.
The kingdom's identity was defined less by external events and more by its internal balance, governed by the steady presence of king and guardian. The bond between Alaric and Malik had grown remarkably deep over the years. Malik had learned to interpret the subtlest shifts in the king's mood, a hesitant step, a thoughtful pause, a quiet sigh. These small cues were enough to prompt gentle responses, nudges, shifts of weight, or the movement of the trunk. Alaric, in turn, trusted these signals implicitly, valuing the silent understanding that had developed over decades. Together, they maintained the kingdom's flow with a quiet authority that no external force could disrupt. Seasons continued their steady cycle. Spring brought soft rains, nurturing the gardens and fields. Summer's warmth invited long walks through shaded corridors and quiet pathways. Autumn painted the trees in muted gold and brown tones, and winter frost settled on windows and rooftops with gentle persistence. Malik adapted naturally, finding sunny spots in winter and shaded areas in summer, demonstrating an awareness of his environment that reflected the kingdom's own rhythm. The occasional seasonal gatherings were subdued and deliberate. Twice a year, the king and palace staff acknowledged the changing seasons in the gardens. Tea was poured carefully, pastries served with precision, and soft words exchanged. Malik participated calmly, standing quietly or gently nudging a guest. These understated rituals reinforced the continuity of Velmore's calm, orderly existence. Velmore's history, though uneventful by the standards of other kingdoms, was meticulously recorded. Every small act, the alignment of a scroll, the adjustment of a candle, the careful arrangement of stones, was preserved. These records captured the essence of a kingdom that thrived not on spectacle or chaos, but on deliberate, patient attention to the smallest details. The days flowed gently into weeks, months, and years. King Alaric and Malik maintained their slow, deliberate routines, walking the halls, tending the gardens, and overseeing the castle's orderly existence. Every gesture, every careful step, and every minor adjustment contributed to a living legacy. Though mundane to outsiders, these acts formed the very foundation of Velmore's enduring presence. And so the kingdom continued, unbroken and serene. King and guardian walked together, their silent partnership shaping the rhythm of life. In stillness, there was strength. In quiet companionship, wisdom. And in the slow, unbroken flow of days, there was history. A history not marked by battles or triumphs, but by patience, attention, and the enduring presence of a king and his silent guardian. And so the kingdom continued, unbroken and serene. King Alaric and Malik walked together, their silent partnership shaping the rhythm of life. In stillness, there was strength. In quiet companionship, wisdom. And in the slow, steady flow of days, there was history. A history defined not by battles or victories, but by patience, presence, and the endearing bond between a lonely king and his silent guardian. The first light of dawn spilled softly through the tall windows of Velmore Castle. King Alaric rose with gentle deliberation, and Malik, as always, was already present, waiting with calm patience. The elephant's massive form, poised yet relaxed, seemed to anchor the stillness of the castle itself. Their morning routine was unchanging, measured steps through the stone corridors, soft echoes marking the rhythm of a kingdom untouched by haste or noise. Castle staff moved carefully around them. Candles were straightened, floors swept with soft strokes, and doors polished to a subtle sheen. Trays of food were laid with precision, each item in its place. No sudden movements, no raised voices, no rush. Only deliberate attention to detail, which had become the foundation of Velmore's order. Even visitors, rare as they were, could sense a calm, feeling almost as though they had entered a place removed from the chaos of the outside world.
The gardens remained a focal point of daily life. King Alaric paused at familiar spots, inspecting flowers, shrubs, and the gentle flow of water in the fountains. Malik wandered alongside, trunk occasionally brushing a leaf or nudging a small stone back into alignment. These subtle interventions, almost imperceptible to outsiders, preserved the symmetry and quiet harmony of the castle grounds. Every plant, every stone, and every ripple of water seemed to respond to their slow, deliberate presence. Within the library, the king spent long hours immersed in scrolls, manuscripts, and ancient texts. Malik moved quietly among the shelves or rested near the large windows overlooking the gardens, occasionally nudging a scroll toward Alaric. Scholars who visited over the years marveled at the elephant's apparent intelligence and attentiveness. Malik seemed to anticipate the king's needs without words or gestures that any human could easily interpret. In this silent communication, a profound understanding had developed over decades, a companionship rooted in patience and presence. Even minor disturbances were handled with careful attention. A gust of wind rattled a window, a candle sputtered, a scroll fell to the floor. Malik often noticed these first, indicating the problem with a subtle movement. Alaric responded calmly, correcting the issue without haste. These small acts, repeated countless times over years, maintained the continuity of Velmore's rhythm, ensuring that the kingdom passed through each day with quiet order and harmony. Evenings remained predictable yet comforting. The king would sit by the fireplace, reviewing notes, or simply gazing into the flames. Malik rested nearby, occasionally shifting or raising his trunk to acknowledge Alaric. Servants moved silently, attending to minor tasks, arranging cushions, replenishing tea, and lighting candles. The castle seemed to breathe with the rhythm of its occupants, a living organism defined by stillness, attention, and careful order. Outside, the town of Velmore mirrored the calm within. Farmers tended fields methodically, children played quietly, and artisans worked with careful, deliberate precision. Occasional news of distant wars or disasters reached the town, but life continued unaffected. Velmore's identity was defined not by external events, but by the steady, attentive presence of its ruler and his silent guardian. Over time, the bond between Alaric and Malik deepened further. Malik became sensitive to the subtlest changes in the king's mood. A pause, a hesitation, a thoughtful glance or sigh. These signals were sufficient for a gentle response, a nudge, a shift of posture, or the careful movement of a trunk. Alaric, in turn, relied on these gestures, understanding that silence often conveyed more meaning than words could ever convey. Together, they maintained the rhythm of the kingdom, ensuring every day passed without disturbance or imbalance. The seasons continued their slow, deliberate cycle. Spring brought soft, nourishing rains to the gardens. Summer's warmth invited long, leisurely walks along shaded paths. Autumn painted the trees in muted gold and brown, while winter frost settled gently on windows, roofs, and garden stones. Malik adjusted naturally, seeking sunlight in winter and shade in summer, reflecting and reinforcing the kingdom's calm rhythm. Twice a year, seasonal gatherings in the gardens served as subtle markers of time's passage. Tea was poured, pastries served, and soft words exchanged. Malik participated naturally, standing quietly or gently nudging a guest. These understated ceremonies reinforced the continuity of Velmore's existence, highlighting the rhythm of life rather than grandeur or spectacle. Velmore's history, though quiet and uneventful, was carefully preserved. Every minor act, The alignment of scrolls, the adjustment of candles, the careful placement of stones was recorded in meticulous detail. These records, while lacking in dramatic battles or heroic events, captured the essence of a kingdom that thrived on patience, attention, and quiet endurance. And so the days flowed gently into weeks, months, and years. King Alaric and Malik continued their slow, deliberate routines, walking the halls, tending the gardens, and observing the careful order of Velmore. Each gesture, step, and minor adjustment contributed to the living legacy of the kingdom. Though mundane to outsiders, these acts formed the foundation of Velmore's enduring presence. In this way, the kingdom persisted, unbroken, serene, and harmonious. King and guardian walked together, their silent companionship shaping the heartbeat of the castle. In stillness, there was strength. In quiet companionship, wisdom. And in the slow, steady flow of days, there was history. A history defined not by battles or victories, but by patience, presence, and the enduring bond between a lonely king and his silent guardian.
In this way, the kingdom of Velmore continued, unbroken and serene, its rhythm maintained by the silent partnership of King Alaric and his loyal elephant, Malik. Days passed in a quiet cadence, each blending imperceptibly into the next. To outsiders, the kingdom might appear uneventful, almost monotonous. Yet within the castle walls, each gesture, step, and small act formed the tapestry of history, woven by patience, attention, and deliberate care. As dawn broke, the soft light spilled across the stone floors of the castle. King Alaric rose slowly, stretching gently, while Malik waited patiently at the threshold of the chamber, massive and calm. Their morning ritual remained unchanged, walking through the corridors with slow, measured steps, observing the halls, windows, and tapestries as though the very walls depended on their attention. The echo of footsteps in the long corridors seemed almost like the heartbeat of the castle itself. The palace staff moved quietly around them, their actions deliberate and harmonious. Candles were straightened, floors swept, doors polished, and trays carefully arranged. Each movement was measured, no gesture was wasted. Even the smallest act, adjusting a cushion, smoothing a rug, or replacing a fallen leaf, was performed with meticulous attention. These subtle actions maintained the order and calm that defined Valmore, ensuring that the rhythm of life remained uninterrupted. In the gardens, the king paused frequently to examine the flowers, hedges, and fountains. Malik wandered beside him, trunk occasionally brushing a leaf or nudging a stone back into place. These small interventions, almost imperceptible to anyone else, preserved the harmony of the grounds. Every flower, every ripple in the fountain, and every stone in the path seemed to respond to the deliberate attention of the king and his guardian. Visitors who happened upon the garden often commented on the serenity, feeling as though they had entered a place untouched by haste or chaos. Inside the castle, the library remained a sanctuary. King Alaric spent long hours reading manuscripts and scrolls, noting details in his own journals, and reflecting silently. Malik moved quietly among the shelves, sometimes resting near the window, occasionally nudging a scroll toward the king. Scholars and visiting scribes often marveled at Malik's apparent intelligence, observing that he seemed to anticipate the king's needs without being instructed. This silent communication had developed over decades, forming a bond that words could not capture. Minor disturbances occurred as always. A window rattled in the wind, a candle flickered or went out, a scroll slipped from a shelf. Malik often noticed these changes first, indicating the problem with subtle gestures, a shift of the trunk, a careful nudge. The king responded calmly, correcting the minor disorder without haste.
These small interactions, repeated endlessly over the years, reinforced the rhythm of Velmore, creating a kingdom where each day passed with quiet efficiency and order. Evenings followed the predictable, comforting pattern. King Alaric sat by the fireplace, reviewing notes or reading quietly, while Malik rested nearby. Servants moved silently, attending to minor tasks, arranging cushions, replenishing tea, lighting candles. The castle seemed to breathe in time with its occupants, a living organism whose heartbeat was measured by stillness, patience, and deliberate attention. Outside, the town of Velmore mirrored the calm of the castle. Farmers worked methodically, children played quietly in the streets, and artisans practiced their crafts with care and precision. News from distant lands, reports of wars, rebellions, or disasters, was noted politely, then set aside. Life continued as usual, undisturbed by the chaos of the outside world. Velmore's identity was defined not by events beyond its walls, but by the steady presence of its ruler and the elephant that guided him. The bond between king and guardian deepened further over the years. Malik had learned to interpret the smallest changes in the king's mood: a pause, a slight hesitation, a quiet glance or quiet sigh. These signals were sufficient to prompt a response: a gentle nudge, a careful shift of posture, or a subtle adjustment of position. King Alaric trusted these gestures as much as his own judgment. Through this silent partnership, the rhythm of the kingdom remained uninterrupted, a testament to the power of quiet understanding. Seasons continued their deliberate, unhurried cycle. Spring brought gentle rains to nourish the gardens and fields. Summer's warmth encouraged long, leisurely walks in the shaded paths. Autumn painted the trees in muted gold and brown tones, and winter's frost settled quietly on rooftops and windows. Malik adapted naturally, finding sunlight in winter and shade in summer, demonstrating an awareness that mirrored the calm, measured rhythm of the kingdom. The occasional seasonal gatherings were understated but purposeful. Twice a year, the king and palace staff would mark the changing seasons in the gardens. Tea was poured carefully, pastries served with soft, deliberate gestures, and quiet words were exchanged. Malik participated with calm dignity, standing quietly, occasionally nudging a guest or sampling a piece of fruit. These small rituals reinforced the continuity of life in Velmore, marking the passage of time without grandeur or spectacle. Velmore's history, though lacking in dramatic battles or heroic events, was preserved meticulously. Every minor act, the realignment of a scroll, the careful placement of stones, the lighting of candles, was recorded in detail. These records, though seeming mundane, captured the essence of a kingdom that thrived not on spectacle, but on patient observation, attentiveness, and careful order. Days flowed into weeks, months, and years with quiet consistency. King Alaric and Malik continued their slow, deliberate routines, tending the castle, gardens, and town with care. Each gesture, each careful step, and each minor adjustment contributed to a living legacy. Though uneventful to outsiders, these acts formed the foundation of Velmore's enduring presence. The kingdom persisted, unbroken and serene. King and guardian walked together, their silent companionship shaping the rhythm of life. In stillness there was strength, in quiet companionship, wisdom, and in the slow, steady flow of days, there was history. The history defined not by conquest or spectacle, but by patience, attention, and the enduring bond between a lonely king and his silent guardian. The kingdom of Velmore had endured through decades, centuries even. Its life defined not by grand battles, not by conquest, and not by fame, but by quiet, deliberate attention, patience, and the enduring bond between a king and his elephant. King Alaric and Malik had walked side by side for years, shaping the rhythm of a kingdom whose heartbeat was measured in small gestures, careful steps, and silent understanding. Morning arrived softly, as it had countless times before. Light filtered gently through the high windows of the castle, spilling across the stone floors. King Alaric rose slowly, stretching deliberately, while Malik waited patiently at the chamber threshold. Together, they began their familiar walk through the corridors, their footsteps echoing lightly, a rhythm that had become woven into the very stones of the castle. The staff moved in harmony with this rhythm. Candles were straightened, floors swept with careful strokes, doors polished to a gentle shine, and trays of food arranged meticulously. Every gesture, no matter how small, contributed to the calm order of Velmore. Servants had learned to act deliberately, without hurry or sudden movement, mirroring the stillness of the king and his silent guardian. Even rare visitors felt the quiet authority of the place, sensing a world that existed apart from chaos and noise. The gardens remained central to daily life. King Alaric paused often to inspect flowers, hedges, fountains, and a subtle alignment of stones along the paths. Malik ambled alongside him, trunk occasionally brushing a stray leaf or nudging a stone back into perfect position. These small, almost imperceptible interventions preserved the quiet symmetry of the grounds, maintaining a harmony that defined the kingdom. Every plant, every ripple of water, every stone seemed to acknowledge their presence, responding to decades of gentle attention. Inside the library, the king spent long hours reading manuscripts, scrolls, and journals, recording his own thoughts on the history of Velmore. Malik moved quietly among the shelves, occasionally nudging a scroll toward Alaric or resting near the windows. Scholars and visiting scribes continued to marvel at the elephant's intelligence and attentiveness. Malik anticipated the king's needs without words, gestures, or commands, a silent communication honed over decades. This partnership, unspoken and precise, had become the cornerstone of the kingdom's enduring rhythm. Minor disturbances still arose occasionally. A gust of wind rattled a window, a candle sputtered, or a scroll slipped to the floor. Malik noticed these incidents first, indicating them with subtle gestures, a shift of weight, a gentle nudge, a raised trunk. The king responded calmly, adjusting the environment without haste. Over years, these repeated, small interventions maintained the unbroken flow of life in Velmore, preserving order and tranquility. Evenings continued in their predictable, comforting manner. King Alaric would sit by the fireplace, reading or reflecting, while Malik rested nearby. Servants moved silently, arranging cushions, replenishing tea, and lighting candles. The castle itself seemed to breathe, a living organism in sync with the deliberate movements of its king and guardian. In this calm, each gesture carried meaning, each movement was significant, and the rhythm of life was steady and continuous. Outside, Velmore's town reflected the calm within the castle. Farmers worked methodically in their fields, children played quietly in the streets, and artisans crafted their works with precise care. News from distant kingdoms arrived occasionally, reports of war, rebellion, or disaster, but it was politely noted and then left aside. Life in Velmore continued undisturbed, shaped not by the events of the outside world, but by the steady presence of its ruler and his silent companion. The bond between Alaric and Malik had grown almost beyond description. The elephant could sense subtle shifts in the king's mood: hesitation, contemplation, a quiet sigh, or a thoughtful glance. Each gesture prompted a gentle response, a nudge, a careful turn, a shift of weight. The king trusted these silent signals, relying on Malik's instincts as much as his own judgment. Through this partnership, the kingdom maintained its rhythm, demonstrating the extraordinary power of quiet companionship. Seasons continued their slow, steady cycle. Spring brought gentle rains, nourishing gardens and fields. Summer's warmth invited long walks in shaded corridors. Autumn's leaves turned gold and brown, and winter frost settled lightly on rooftops, paths, and windows. Malik adjusted his movements to match the seasons, seeking sun in winter, shade in summer, reflecting the kingdom's deliberate, unhurried rhythm. Twice a year, subtle seasonal gatherings marked the passage of time. Tea was poured, pastries served, and quiet words exchanged in the gardens. Malik stood calmly, occasionally nudging a tray or observing the guests with dignity. These rituals reinforced Velmore's continuity, emphasizing rhythm over spectacle, patience over haste, and quiet presence over grand displays. Velmore's history, though uneventful by conventional standards, had been preserved meticulously. Every small act, aligning scrolls, adjusting candles, tending plants, or arranging stones, was recorded with care. These mundane actions formed the kingdom's true legacy, demonstrating that patience, attentiveness, and quiet order could create history as enduring as any war or conquest. Days flowed gently into years, years into decades. King Alaric and Malik continued their slow, deliberate routines, overseeing the castle, gardens, and town. Every gesture, every careful step, every minor adjustment contributed to the living tapestry of Velmore. To unnoticed outsiders, these acts created a foundation that allowed the kingdom to endure, serene and unbroken across generations. And so the kingdom persisted, timeless and tranquil. King and guardian walked together, their silent partnership shaping the heartbeat of the castle. In stillness there was strength, in quiet companionship wisdom, and in the slow, unbroken flow of days there was history. Not a history of battles, conquests, or fame, but a history of patience, care, and enduring presence. A kingdom defined not by what happened loudly, but by what endured quietly. Velmore, the castle, the gardens, the town, and the silent companionship of King Alaric and Malik, the elephant who had shared decades of life with him, stood as a testament to the power of calm, observation, and unhurried attention. And though the outside world may have rushed and roared, within the walls of Velmore, time moved deliberately, gently, and eternally.